So Eileen Gu has been in the hot seat lately, partially because the Wall Street Journal reported that China is paying her $3.3 million a year to compete for them. The way that story came about is actually pretty funny. The local government in Beijing accidentally leaked her name in an official document, so people were able to see what her annual budget was. Of course, once people noticed it, that information was quickly scrubbed clean from the internet, and all the social media posts about it were taken down as well. Just to be fully transparent, I had no idea who Eileen Gu was until very recently. I vaguely remember hearing her name maybe 4 years ago, but back then I didn't really dig into it. The reason I got familiarized with her this time around was because a few weeks ago, a couple of conservatives, including JD Vance, were complaining about American athletes competing for other countries. And initially, I was totally on her side. Maybe because I've seen it happen so many times in sports, so it's not that big of a deal to me anymore. You have to understand, more often than not, it's purely a financial transaction. It has nothing to do with patriotism or national pride. But if you're American and you're unhappy about her decision to compete for China, I totally get it. It's a natural reaction. However, I just want to point out that a lot of Americans, given the same opportunity like her to make generational wealth, would probably end up making the same decision. So let's not blow things out of proportion. You can criticize her if you want, but what she's doing definitely doesn't rise to the level of treason as some may have suggested. With that being said though, the more I learned about her, there were a few things that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. For starters, as some of you may know, China doesn't recognize dual citizenship. So in order for Eileen Gu to compete for China, she would have had to renounce her US citizenship. But based on the available evidence, she never did that. And whenever she's asked by a reporter about her citizenship status, she always tries to obfuscate and deflect. So presumably she currently has dual American and Chinese citizenships, which again is explicitly prohibited under Chinese law. But to be fair to her, she's definitely not the first one. China had offered similar deals to foreign athletes in the past as well. So for me personally, the citizenship thing doesn't bother me that much. What I find way more annoying about her is the way that she consistently portrays herself as this great cultural ambassador, and nobody should ever dare to question her motives. She has this infamous quote where she said she's feeling a lot of pressure at times because she's carrying the weight of two countries, which if you ask me is kind of bullshit, because if there's anything she's carrying, is the weight of $3.3 million in cash. And that's on top of all the other endorsement money she's making by competing for China. But again, don't get me wrong, I fully support her in making as much money as she can. It's just that she's never been honest about it. I would respect her a lot more if she just came out and said, I'm competing for China because they're paying me more money. But of course, the problem with that is as soon as she says that, China will cut her off immediately. And oh, by the way, that $3.3 million she's getting is supposed to be for training purposes within China only. But if I'm not mistaken, she only stayed in China for fewer than 30 days last year. So unless she managed to spend over $3 million in less than a month, the vast majority of that money was spent overseas, including in the US where she lives. So if you really think about it, she's actually using Chinese money to stimulate the US economy. And I think that's pretty goddamn patriotic. Jokes aside though, my theory for why she acts like she's above criticism at times is partially due to the fact that she's getting glazed non-stop on Chinese social media. Just because of the geopolitical tension between China and the US, she's now kind of tied to China at the hip. So as a result, any criticism of her as an individual is being seen, at least in China, as criticism of China as a whole. Therefore, all you see about her on Chinese social media is just wall-to-wall positive coverage. And I think that skews her perception of reality in a way. There's one particular clip that's gone viral on Chinese social media where a reporter asked her a question and people lost their shit over it. They're accusing the reporter of being her number one hater and for asking her a loaded question.
Do you see these as 2 silvers gained or 2 golds lost?
I'm the most decorated female free skier in history. I think that's an answer in and of itself.
But if you actually watch the video, the question by the reporter couldn't have been more mundane. If anything, what jumped out was how arrogant and condescending she was in her answer. Especially that fake laugh at the beginning just came off as so pretentious. If you're a fair observer, you could easily tell that exchange between her and the reporter was nothing out of the ordinary, and the reporter was not being malicious at all. But the people on Chinese social media just can't resist turning her into a victim all the time, and oftentimes they will even bring up Alysa Liu, another Chinese-American Olympian, and portray her as this turncoat and post disparaging comments about her in order to prop up Eileen Gu's image. You know, this is why I have such mixed feelings about this whole controversy. On the one hand, I understand that it could be pretty exhausting for her to be fending off attacks all the time, some of which could be pretty vile in nature. And let's be real, if she's competing for France, for instance, she wouldn't have gotten half the criticism. It's the fact that she's competing for China that's really pissing people off. But conversely, her hypocrisy and condescension really gets on my nerves sometimes. I remember watching this one clip where she was bitching about all the hate comments she was getting. I was like, dude, you made the conscious decision to compete for China as opposed to your home country, albeit for financial reasons, but nobody forced you to do that. That's all on you. And honestly, what do you expect? You think Americans are gonna love you for doing that? I mean, at some point, you gotta take some personal responsibility, right? If you wanna make millions of dollars from the Chinese government every year, you gotta at least be okay with the ramifications of that back home where you actually live, at least for 11 months out of the year. You just can't have your cake and eat it too.